And we are live on the Get Foxy show with Polly Letofsky. Polly,
Yay!
thank you so much for being on the Get Foxy show today. I sure appreciate you taking the time.
I'm honored. Thank you for asking me.
So the show has three main topics that I generally tend to talk about: holistic health, natural beauty, and passionate living. And I really felt like you were ideal for the passionate living category because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are considered to be the first woman to literally walk around the globe. Have I got that correct?
That is, but just to be fair, there was another woman that walked around the world, but she actually then admitted to catching rides across America. But even with those rides she caught, she actually did more mileage than me. So it kind of depends on how you want to define it. Officially, yes.
Well, I think you count.
Okay, there you go.
Now, how did this all come about?
My walk around the world stems from a childhood dream I had. I was 12 years old growing up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. Frankly, idyllic childhood. I can't give you the woes of childhood because I didn't have them. I had a great childhood. Full of, friends and parents who said, get out of the house. I don't want to see you till 6. So you and your friends are full of imagination and making up games and this kind of thing. And then one day I saw this article in a newspaper about a man walking around the world. And it's just a picture of him and his buggy walking down an empty road, and he's pulling a buggy behind him. And it said David Kunst walking down Highway 6 in Colorado on his way home to Minnesota to become the first man to walk around the world. And I thought, well, wow, I could do that. I could put one foot in front of the other. How difficult could that be? I think that's how I want to go see the world someday. I think I'll walk. And you know what I did, actually? I went out and wanted to prove to myself that I could walk around the world. So I walked around the house for like 3 hours. I walked around the house. And I kind of thought, well, good enough. I can do that. Next stop, the world. So I really had this dream as a child that I was going to go see the world by foot and sort of by that ground level, grassroots level, and meet people, town to town, village to village. And so the idea always stuck with me. And I was pulling into my mid-30s, and I kept sneaking up into the forefront of my brain. I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I best get a move on. So there was this magical connection between, it was sneaking up into the forefront of my brain at the same time when a number of women in my world were being diagnosed with breast cancer. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do that walk for, that I've always wanted to do. So I would do this walk, and I knew it had to be worth something much bigger than just Polly walking around the world. It had to be something bigger than me. And so I thought, that's what I'll do my walk for, that I've always wanted to do. I would dedicate it to the women of the world. So that set the motion in, and I started planning my global walk for breast cancer.
And what kind of planning did that take?
Well, the planning years were about 1997 to 1999. So if I could take you back technologically, I remember, we just had a few websites, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember when I got really serious about it, I went out and bought all the maps of the world because there were only a handful of websites. So Google didn't exist yet and things like that. So I had maps spread out around the floor. And I was just literally let me take you back. Remember when maps had like dot to dot to dot, and then they'd have the little number in between the dots, right? It wasn't even that long ago, but let me take you back. So I remember I was just adding it up across China, across Uzbekistan, doing this little 15 miles between here and here and having to calculate between kilometers and miles depending on the country. But that's how I started my planning. It was like maps all over the floor doing the math between the dot to dots on the map. So that's how it started. And I was a distance runner in high school. So I knew that I had to pace myself. I certainly learned how to pace myself through all those years of training. You can't go bullseye out, running your 2-mile race in 10 minutes. You just can't do it that way. So I knew I had to pace myself. I'd learned those lessons. So my pace when in the planning years were, walk 3-4 days, take a day off, 3-4 days, take a day off, an average of 16 miles a day. which, by the way, if you ever get this in Trivial Pursuit, on average, miles between towns is 16 miles apart. There you go. So I really walked town to town. Anyway, so those were the planning. I didn't really have to go get in shape because I was always kind of in shape anyway. You know, I was always that active girl. I was living in Vail, climbing mountains all the time. So my research and getting in shape was more about figuring out nutrition. How was I going to take care of myself? And learning basics of languages and learning about first aid and stuff like that. And I remember I went on this sort of rampage reading books about people who had been in similar circumstances, meaning out in the middle of nowhere for lengths of time. Mentally, how did they deal with that kind of thing? You know, read a book about a couple who were sailing, they get hit by a whale or whatever it was, but it puts a big gash in their boat. Boat starts sinking. So they got 15 minutes to get things out onto a dinghy, and then they float around the South Pacific for 3 months before they're rescued by a Korean fishing ship, right? So I'm thinking, no matter what happens, I will not be floating around randomly in the South Pacific, you know, catching turtles with dental floss. So, I mean, I can't get worse than that. But that was part of the training, you know, getting my mind used to being alone and giving it that strength to go those next steps. And dare I say that really worked because I was reading those books for years. So as it turned out, in fact, I had trained so much for being alone. What I never even thought about training my mind for is the polar opposite of that, which was crowds of people and overwhelming attention. And I'd never trained for that. So when in fact that happened, which I'm sure we'll talk about how I got there, I wasn't prepared for that. I was overwhelmed. So who knew, right? So, so those are the things I trained for and did my homework on prior to leaving.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this something that you self-funded, or did you end up getting sponsors, or how did that work?
A little bit of both, but here's a little secret, is that no organizations will give you money, okay? Just flat out money for one-person events, okay? It's not going to happen. But I did get some sponsorships for product and services. But a couple of great things happened. Is a big one is the hotel I was working at in Vail. I was working at the Antlers Hotel, and the general manager offered me this great position where, you know, they were closed from like 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So they needed someone to stay on property afterwards, essentially live on property and be that person that will tend to emergencies in the middle of the night. What if someone's drunk and loses their keys? What if someone's checking in after midnight? I was that person. So I stayed on property for a couple of years in exchange for that paid for my lodging and cable and phone and everything else. So that allowed me an opportunity to save money to do this. But once I hit the road, what happened is pretty early on in my journey, my 7th month into my 5-year journey, I met this woman on the side of the road in Southern Australia who was the president of a local Lions Club. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I told her what I was doing, and she heard my funny accent and said, you know, "Well, the Lions Clubs have got to get involved with this. Why don't you come home with me tonight?" So I said, "Okay." So I followed her home, and I'm getting my hot shower and everything that I thought would be so elusive. But in the meantime, she was calling all of her Lions Club buddies. Now, if you know what a Lions Club is, they're like Rotary Club, Kiwanis, they're these service organizations that are in every town around the world. Like, who knew, right? So she calls all of her buddies and invites them to go to the pub that night. And we go to the pub. Now, the pub in rural Australian towns is where everything happens, right? It's date night, it's guys' night, everything happens at the pub. So we go to the pub. And the place is packed. And Margaret got up on a stool and she introduced me and she said, "This is Polly. She's raising funds to help Australian women going through breast cancer. So let's show her a little Aussie spirit." So she just leaned right over. She plucked the hat off a guy's head and started passing this hat around. So I can't get a picture of it, right? But I have this great picture etched in my mind of this hat floating through the pool hall. and the dartboard competition in the bar and the restaurant, and the bartender announces to this cheering crowd, "We've just raised $332 for the Breast Cancer Network Australia." Yay! And they start cheering. And then the next morning, Margaret said, "Let me call the Lions Club up the road." And she did. And they said, "Sure, send her up." So I walked 15 miles, and they greeted me and said, "Let's go to the pub." And I said, "Okay." So I go to the pub, and they passed a hat around, and I walk to the next pub and the next Lions Club, and next thing you know, I'm doing a 2,000-mile pub crawl up the east coast of Australia. So in case you ever get stranded in Australia, here's the secret: pubs and Lions Clubs, okay? You'll never be stranded again. So it was terrific fun. We raised a lot of money for the Breast Cancer Network Australia, but more importantly, the Lions Clubs exploded into this international sponsorship of Lions Clubs from village to village that passed me around the world like a human chain. Is that stunning?
That's amazing.
I don't thank God every day that I ran into Margaret on the side of the road early on in Australia. So when you get back to that question, how did you fund this? Was it self-funded? Yes, it was. But also the Lions Clubs, when they got involved, they really they made it so much easier for me and helped me stay safe by putting me up every night and taking me out to do the fundraising, which was 1,000 times more than I ever thought it would be. But more important, they contacted the press around the country. So what happened was, now this entire nation started rallying behind me and making sure I get through the country safe and fat. I mean, the truckers and the Harley driving, the Harley riders with the motorbikes. Yeah, every Sunday afternoon, the Harley riders go on their Sunday afternoon ride. So they were taking good care of me and everybody along the way, the farmers. Wow. So eventually, one of the Lions Clubs in Australia, in the town called Mackay, which is in Queensland, they took me in, officially asked me to become a member of their club, which I enthusiastically accepted, but under the understanding I might not be at every meeting. But they took me on as a member, and from that point on, I had a Lions Club that I could always turn to as I started entering Southeast Asia and the events after 9/11, et cetera. I always had someone to turn to. So they essentially started funding. I mean, they never gave me money, but they alleviated all the costs for me. So once in a while I had an ice cream cone. So that's what it was.
So which countries did you go through? You've mentioned Australia, you've mentioned the US and East Asia.
Yeah, I went from Vail to California coast, just south of LA. Then I went to New Zealand, walked the length of New Zealand, and then up through Australia. I went from the south to the north, then from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, across India. And now at this point, when I was in Southeast Asia, 9/11 struck. So I was in Malaysia, my first Muslim country, when 9/11 struck. Wow. And the Lions Clubs and Rotary Clubs were now with me every day, all day. And there were crowds of people. And they asked me if I wanted to continue the morning of 9/11, which actually happened nighttime in Malaysia. But by the time I was walking at 7 a.m. the next day, they were really getting their heads around what was happening with 9/11. That's when we first found out about it, because 12-hour difference between New York City and Malaysia. So anyway, they were like, "Well, where do you want to find internet? Do you want to continue walking today? Do you want to make phone calls? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Let's continue walking, but I would really like to find a place to stay where I have internet access and I have access to news channels, see what's going on." And they did. Now, here's the irony. That night, which was 9/11 New York time, but September 12th in Malaysia, was the only night in my 5 years that I actually stayed with a Muslim family. And I remember sitting down, the actual parents of that family had to go away that night, just for the night. They had something planned. I didn't want to stop them from doing it just because I wanted to stay and watch TV. You know? So they plunked me down in a chair in front of CNN with their mother, who is a Muslim woman, doesn't speak any English. I don't speak, I think it was Mandarin she was speaking. So we just sat there together, me and this Muslim woman, watching CNN together, couldn't talk to each other, but watched it sort of the beginnings of unfolding of information together. It was a very surreal moment, especially now that I look back on it. And knowing now that that was the only night I spent with a Muslim family after having spent, you know, every night with a different family. It's actually a very special memory that I have. So that night was sort of a game changer in my life, because I had a very candid conversation with that Muslim family, but it was very interesting as well. So yeah, that was a game changer. So
yeah.
okay.
I can't even imagine how surreal that had to be.
Yeah, and remember those first days, we didn't really know what was going on. There were some assumptions, some ideas, theories, but we didn't really know what was going on. So now that I look back on it, especially, it's like, wow, that was really crazy. And, you know, I continued to walk through Malaysia, which again is a very Muslim country. And I remember I'm walking with crowds of people, yet sticking out like a sore thumb, of course. Mm-hmm. But I remember on Fridays, when you walk on Friday, and that's the day Muslims go to their mosque, and they were all waving me in, like, come into the mosque. And of course I wanted to, but I thought, maybe it's not the right time, maybe another time, almost any other time. So I didn't, and I stand by that decision. That was not the right time. You know, even a month later would have been fine, but not a day or two after 9/11. Let's just, you know, that was a decision I made. And actually, like on the spur of the moment, as they're waving me in, and I decide, should I, shouldn't I? Maybe another time. So I stand by it to this day, though. So yeah, it was interesting. I feel blessed to have that point of view. You know, like, I don't know what was going on in America during the immediate aftermath of 9/11, you know, those hours and days, weeks after 9/11. So in fact, it was really interesting, as we just celebrated, you know, a few years ago now, but the 10-year anniversary. And there was a lot of replay of that news that was going on and the unfolding of it. So that was interesting for me to see finally, years later, what happened here. You see what I mean? That was really interesting to watch that years later.
I was planning on asking you about what experiences on your journey had changed your life, but I think you just answered that question.
Yeah, I realized things like I have patience, and that's a lesson that I take with me. But if I could sound a little schizophrenic about this, I have more patience in that if I have a project to do, or if something is developing, I'm patient with it. Yet, I am more impatient with, say, people who say they're going to do something and they don't. I just kind of go, next. And I have to relax on that a little bit, because those were almost life-threatening things if people didn't show up when they said they'd show up, say on my walk, to do something. So I have more patience, but I have less patience too, depending on the situation. But also realize things like, I don't know, I have more discipline than I thought I had. And that's something, I guess, that takes practice, and I guess 5 years of that, that realize that I have discipline. And I take that with me as well now. All these years later, I realize that is a lesson I learned from the road.
And so you took these lessons and you put them into a book. What made you decide to write your book?
Well, You know, writing actually runs in my veins because my dad's a writer, mom's a writer. And I never did any writing until I hit the road. And then I was open and free to just be myself. I wasn't writing to get paid for something. I wasn't writing to get graded on something. I was just writing to tell my friends and family what was going on the road. So I could just really just open up and be myself. Well, as it turns out, that was a good load of fun. And, and so my writing, now the word blog didn't exist yet, but my journal on the website, all right, really started to attract people. And I started to build a following. And then I said, oh, what the heck, I'll enter this writing piece into a writing contest that was about travel writing. So I'm like, what the heck? And I won. I won a grand prize, which was a cruise in Costa Rica. So, and because I was writing every day, that writing started to develop. Now, I did not leave on my walk with the idea in my head that I would write a book. That never entered my head. But when I was done, everyone's saying you got to write a book. And I guess I did. I felt like this can't end with me in my head. The stories that happen, the lessons learned, it can't stop here. So it took me 5 years to walk around the world, then 6 years to write the book about it. And then I handed it over to a crooked publisher. It was just an awful situation. And as it turns out, I started talking to people and they would say, yeah, that's happened to me too. Yeah, that's happened to me too. And everyone's like whispering it like it's some big secret, you know. I got ripped off in the publishing world too. And I said, well, I'm not going to get ripped off again, right? I was embarrassed by this horrible decision that I made. Like, I'm smarter than that. Well, how could that happen? So I said, well, it's not going to happen again. So I've got to figure out how to do this on my own. So I did this deep dive into the self-publishing world. How do you publish a very professional book and be the owner of everything? Not just your copyrights, but your sales rights, your distribution rights, your decisions. So I did this. I started going to the conferences and the, 3-day classes and reading all the blogs, and the deeper I got, the more I just fell in love with this. And a passion was unleashed, the likes of which I hadn't seen since my walk, So what happens when you hit a passion, of course? You want to know more. You want to learn more. You want to be better. You want to be the leader up on those panels that start making the decisions about the industry. So that's where it went. And I republished my own book. Of course, continued to make mistakes because that's what I do.
That's what we all do.
I know, I'm a big pot of mistake going on here. So I eventually republished my book under my own publishing company. And then all my friends kept sending their friends to me saying, Polly's figured it out. You got to go talk to her. So I'm sitting at the Paneras, meeting with people 3 times a week. And here's what you got to do. And I'm making flow charts and graphs and charts and timelines and lists of people that are trustworthy as far as like the service providers, cover designers, ebook conversion people, and development editors, etc. So I've got lists and charts and graphs, and I'm meeting with people. And after a couple of years of that, I said, you know what? Now, I swear this is how it happened. So I'm sitting at a coffee shop with a friend of mine who's in the industry, and I just said, I'm thinking about starting this publishing company, but it would be modeled in which I lead them through the whole system just like a publisher. I essentially do everything that a publisher does, but I don't own any rights, so we've got to publish it under their publishing company, right? Because you've got to own everything, so it has to be your publishing company, okay? So she says, you know what, you should do that. And I promise you the next day, phone call. Someone says to me, I understand you can help me put a whole book together. And I said, yeah, I can do that. So remember, I've got the flow charts, and I've got the people, and but I don't have a name. I don't have prices for anything. How many hours does this take me to bring someone through this? Anyway, so that woman's name is Barbara Oliverio, right? She was our first author. And in fact, just about a month ago, she signed an agreement with the Hallmark Channel that they are making her book into a movie. So I get all cocky. Well, that was our first book. But she's done 4 books of this now, and she's awesome. But that just started it, and it just started flowing. And eventually, I opened My Word Publishing, which is a publishing, consulting, and project management service. So none of our books are published under My Word Publishing, because we have them start their own publishing company and guide them through that whole process and take them by the hand and do everything. So that was, we're heading into our 6th year now doing that. I've published about 220 books now, and I think it's at 40 bestsellers and about 40 national awards. So it's, when I look back at the dot to dots, if I hadn't had the guts to take off, sell everything I owned, which is essentially what I did, and head out into the world during my prime earning years, age 37 to 43 is when I left. So the rest of the world is climbing the ladder and raising their families. And I went into the unknown, essentially, simply because I had this inner compass that I wanted to follow for, and I didn't know what it was going to look like. I certainly wasn't getting paid for it, etc. But the things when you have that passion, again, what happens? So I wasn't a speaker, I wasn't a writer, I certainly didn't deal with the media, but because I had that passion, I wanted to do better and better. So when the media would ask for an interview, I'd say, okay, gee shucks, And I remember a Lions Club, because they're putting me up, and they would say, well, can you come speak to our group tonight? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, how many people are there? And they'd say, well, there's 12 men over the age of 80. I would say, well, I don't know, and I was pretty nervous. But then you start doing it every night. And then you start doing accents and performing. And so it started to be a lot of fun. And those are skill sets that developed while I was on the road. Who knew?
That's amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing. We're starting to run a little short on time here, Polly. So I want to ask you at least one question that I ask every single one of my guests. And that is, what does being foxy mean to you?
I think it means being confident enough in yourself. And being confident means admitting when you don't know, admitting when you've made a mistake, admitting when you, you're admitting almost when you're not confident about something, okay? And I'm always impressed with people like that, that can just go, whoa, did I mess that up? So sorry. I'm impressed with that, And it's not like I want to go into a situation going, boy, I hope I really screw up so I can apologize. But at least having that confidence is really, to say, oh my gosh, I did try my best and I guess my best wasn't good enough, but, sorry you had to be the victim of my boo-boo. I think that's sort of foxy, don't you think?
You bet.
Yeah, I think that's sort of foxy.
So how can people find your book?
You can find my book on Amazon. It's called 3MPH. Ooh, oh, look at this. Oh, I just have it right here. 3MPH, The Adventures of One Woman's Walk Around the World. And God forbid you look for it under my name, because neither my first name or last name is very spellable, but Polly and Letofsky. So, yeah, that's 416 pages wrapped up in 5 years, I guess.
Excellent. And if they want to learn more about My Word Publishing and how you can help someone put out their own book, how do they get that information?
Yes, thank you. I'm off to save the world, as you know, and stop authors from making stupid, very expensive mistakes that I made, please. And that's mywordpublishing.com. And that's where it starts. I say your book starts here. So mywordpublishing.com, and at least let us tell you what to expect and what you should never put up with, even if you didn't work with us. I want to save authors from giving up rights and their money for making bad decisions. So you're welcome. I've already made all the mistakes. I've already wasted all that money, so let me pass it on. Thank you.
All right. Well, there you go, ladies. Definitely check out Polly's website, My Word Publishing. She will save you headaches, heartbreak, and money if you're looking to put your book out there into the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Polly, our time's up, but thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I am so appreciative of you, and I appreciate your generosity on being here and chatting with me today.
Thanks, you foxy thing. Appreciate the invite.